alongside UNDP's resident representative in Ecuador. Now, we will move over to the stage. I welcome David Boyd and Archana Zareng to the stage. Welcome. Archana, would you mind sitting there? David? Welcome. Yeah. Let's see. I'm just going to open my notes. Welcome to Stockholm.
It's great to be here.
So, David, let me start with you. So, to people here who don't know and people online, what does it mean to be a UN Special Rapporteur on Climate and Human Rights? And tell us a little bit about this resolution, 4813.
Yeah, so basically a UN Special Rapporteur is kind of like a watchdog on human rights, making sure that governments and businesses are fulfilling their obligations and responsibilities. And this resolution that was passed last October by the UN Human Rights Council is really a historic moment in the evolution of human rights globally, recognizing that everyone, everywhere, has the right to live in a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. And what does that mean? That means that people have the right to breathe clean air, to safe and sufficient water, to healthy and sustainably produced food, to a safe climate, to healthy ecosystems and biodiversity, and to non-toxic environments where people can live, work, study, and play.
Sounds very ambitious. You compare this with the environmental, you compare the environmental movement with civil rights movement in America. You compared it to the early days of the women's rights movement. Can you elaborate that a little bit? What are the similarities between the environmental movements and these other historic movements?
Yeah, well, these other human rights movements that you're talking about really arose in response to human rights crises. And that's what we're facing today with the triple global environmental crisis is, pollution is killing 9 million people a year, the climate crisis endangering billions of people. And those other movements, like the abolitionists who ended slavery, they really used human rights as a powerful argument to advance that cause and to achieve success in those causes. And I think we're at a point now where we're in a similar position. So, the colonial economy 250 years ago was built on a foundation of slavery, and that had to end. And so when one of the first cases, a British judge, one of the first cases to set a slave free, the judge said, "Let justice be done, though the heavens may fall." And we're in a similar position today with this climate crisis, where we know we have to terminate the fossil fuel industry as quickly as possible. And it's going to have huge economic repercussions. We can't sugarcoat that, but it has to be done in order to achieve justice and to protect the human rights of billions of people on this planet.
What I'm thinking is that, as a political scientist myself, we know there are a lot of these similar rules in some constitutions around the world, in some legal frameworks, but they don't always have tangible effects in a country, right? So why would you expect that this resolution would really have an impact on the ground in countries and help local communities?
Yeah, I understand why people are skeptical about resolutions from the United Nations, but if we look at the last time there was a resolution of this nature, it was in 2010 when the UN recognized for the first time the human right to water. And that has had a cascade of positive effects. Constitutions were changed in countries like Costa Rica, Fiji, Mexico, Slovenia, Tunisia. Laws were changed from Colombia to France. And most importantly, as you said, Victor, change on the ground. So in Mexico, for example, over the past decade, that recognition of the right to water has led to a government program to bring safe drinking water to more than 1,000 rural communities. In my country of Canada, that resolution on the right to water changed the government's position, and the government has worked with Indigenous people to bring safe drinking water to more than 130 remote Indigenous communities. So that resolution was really a catalyst for change, and I fully expect that the recognition of the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment will be a catalyst for accelerated change in terms of renewable energy, clean air, protecting biodiversity, and all of those other elements of the right.
Thank you. I want to invite you, Archana, of course, to this conversation. You're, as I mentioned, a member of the Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group on Climate. You're a climate activist. I saw online someone call you also a climate warrior. So what are your reflections on this type of resolution from the UN? Can you tell from your experience, do you think this will have an impact?
First of all, I would like to say that this particular resolution in terms of human right and environment has made a lot of difference for us. Because for me, coming from an indigenous community and coming from Khariya tribe, for us, nature is a source of identity, culture, tradition, language. And when we see environment and human rights, it's not separate for us, it's intrinsic. And that is when I feel that having these kind of resolution also advocates for it and also emphasize for it that for us indigenous people and local communities, fighting for our life dignity is also fighting for our environment. And it has to do a lot more with what our indigenous elders and ancestors have been defending our territories, land, forest, and which also brings down to the narrative and fact that when indigenous people and local communities are protecting the environment, are restoring the ecosystem, they are contributing to ecosystem restoration and climate action, which now if we see from the lens of human rights also brings down the narrative that often during this action or this practices, they have been under gross human rights violation, which again cannot be seen as a separate entity of human right violation and ecosystem restoration or environmental restoration, which brings them and ties them together to say that there are indigenous people, local communities, young people, and a lot of communities in the margins who are impacted by climate crisis, who are impacted by environmental degradation, and whose way of living, not merely what they do, but who they are, is what they have been contributing to climate action. And that's why I feel that indigenous people, local communities, and young people should be leaders of decision-making processes when it comes to ecosystem restoration, biodiversity conservation, and climate action, and not victims of it, of the policy-making spaces. And that's why I feel resolution like this is also a kind of defense and also a kind of enabling environment and mechanism which we need for the communities.
I'm thinking that for resolutions such as this one, that you need a judicial system that is working, right? Somehow. Is that a concern in India or in general? How would you make sure that the judicial system operates in the spirit of this resolution and doesn't block it or ignore it?
For me, I think it's really important to see as a global way. And when I say it's important to see as a global way, I think it's really important for us to also see as a policy makers and decision makers that when we are making this frameworks, when we are making this resolution, it's just not a resolution. We also have structures and mechanism in place in terms of implementation, which also brings down to me that it's really crucial that how these are implemented. Is it again implemented in a way of imposition or in a participatory approach, which again brings down to the fact that it's really important that we make young people, indigenous people, local communities part of the process of implementation, and that is what I think will make a lot of difference. Also, I would like to emphasize that it's really crucial to see that when these resolutions are made, are we leaving people behind? Because I think at the same time, it's also important to see that are people aware of this resolution? Because I think language plays a very crucial role in terms of dissemination of this information. And I would like to urge and advocate and propose that it's really important that we make sure that these resolutions are also translated in the regional languages, because it will be more accessible to people. And the second thing which I feel is really important when we are talking about young people, indigenous people, local communities, and environment and human rights, I think it's really crucial that we have safe and enabling spaces for them, because often we want to engage with communities, but what are the safe and enabling spaces which we have for them is important. And I think, as rightly said, that our right to life, right to water, right to live with dignity has a lot to do with environment, because in most of the regions of indigenous communities and local communities, we have extractive developmental projects, which often when we are talking about air pollution, in the cities we understand, but people fail to acknowledge how air pollution is happening in the rural and grassroots areas as well.
That's a good point. I mean, on accessibility, but again, the judicial system and its operation, isn't that a concern that we're seeing? Those are weak in many countries. Their resolution would really not have an impact because of that.
Right. I mean, I think it's fair to say that in countries where you don't have an effective rule of law, where you have corruption, weakness in government institutions, then these resolutions are really just words on paper, they're aspirations. But that's part and parcel of what we need to do. And in countries around the world, what's really been fascinating, over the past 40 years, we've seen a growing number of cases being brought by local grassroots people, indigenous people, young people, asserting their right to live in a healthy environment through the judicial system when governments have failed them. So for example, there's a wonderful case from Colombia where a group of 25 children and youth sued their own government for failing to protect the Amazon rainforest. And they succeeded in winning a case at the Supreme Court of Colombia, ruling that their right to a healthy environment had been violated by deforestation, with the court ordering the government to take steps to stop the deforestation. And we're seeing that type of case being brought forward in country after country around the world. In some countries with great success, in other countries less so.
What would you say, Archana? Do you have an additional example of a success story where actually these rights have been executed in a way?
Yeah, so I would like to emphasize that the regions or the communities who have their rights over the land, forest and territory recognized has made a lot of difference to them, specifically in lens of indigenous people and local communities, because when our rights over a land, forest and territory is recognized, we not only have a right to have a safe living, but we also have access to food, which diverse food which we get from the forest, so it leads to food security. Also in terms of livelihood, we are able to cultivate and practice farming and forest-based livelihood in our own region, which often we are deprived from when we are forced to leave our places, when there is land grabbing, when there is eviction. So I see human rights and environment for us indigenous and local communities plays a very, very crucial role, because a right to environment, right to human right is very important from the place where we are and what is our relationship with nature.
Victor, could I add another success story?
Yes.
So one of my favorite success stories is actually one of the countries that led the process to achieve this resolution in Geneva last year was Costa Rica. And Costa Rica added the right to a healthy environment to their constitution in 1994. And at that time, decades of deforestation had reduced forest cover in Costa Rica to less than 25%. But that recognition of this fundamental right to a healthy environment not only has had decades of legal repercussions, but it's changed the culture in Costa Rica too, to where there's real pride in that. And so Costa Rica now has over 50% forest cover. They have 30% of their land in national parks. They get 99% of their electricity from renewable sources. They've passed laws banning open pit mining, banning offshore oil and gas development. And they really are the epitome of what sustainable development looks like. And so one of the ways that they actually managed to achieve this amazing progress in reforestation was by allocating the funds from a carbon tax to indigenous peoples and campesinos, local farmers, to restore and reforest their lands. It's been just enormously successful. So
what about failures? Are there any examples where this actually didn't happen as expected? And what explains such failures?
Yeah, so there are examples of failure. So there was a case brought in Norway several years ago, again, led by young people and Greenpeace, where they were challenging Norway's decision to open up a new area of the Arctic Ocean to offshore oil and gas development. And their legal argument was that that was a violation of their right to a healthy environment as protected by the Norwegian Constitution. That case went to the Supreme Court of Norway, and the Supreme Court of Norway interpreted the right to a healthy environment in a very narrow way and approved of the government's decision to issue these offshore licenses. That case is now under appeal to the European Court of Human Rights, so it's not yet a final failure. But we've also seen failures, for example, in Brazil, where the current government has reversed decades of progress on stopping deforestation, has reversed decades of progress in reducing pollution. And those are, those are poor decisions made by governments, and one can only hope that those governments will be replaced by governments with a more holistic vision of sustainable development.
Chana, do you have any failures that you would like to share, and how would we overcome such failures?
I think if I talk about failure as a young person, I think we have been failed. Because at this moment we are in the state where we are kind of fighting the lost battle, but we still have hope because we see the young people across the globe with the different expertise have been contributing towards ecosystem restoration and climate action. And that's why I feel it's really, really important for us young people to continue the fight. But at the same time, I feel it's really important for us to work intersectionally and also intergenerationally. So we feel we need your advice. We need to work together with the elders. And that's also, I feel that it's really important to make sure that we are working together with respect. Because I feel often there is lack of respect and within us when we are attempting to work together. But I think we will make a lot of difference. And there's a way miles to go ahead in terms of attending our commitments, whether it is in terms of ecosystem restoration, SDGs, and climate action. And we should not fail our upcoming generation, and we need to make the difference right now.
I mean, it sounds to me like a resolution such as this, if you want to have it lead to an impact and be successful, you both need some sort of government support, or at least not blocking, and then also support from the public. Right? So I'm thinking your role as a climate activist becomes increasingly important in that context, just to make sure there is support. But I'm also reflecting a little bit on the fact that we've been through a pandemic and still are in a pandemic in many parts of the world, and also the repercussions of the war on Ukraine, right, on inflation and increasing food prices. How does that affect your work as a climate activist? Or do people still care about climate change and environmental issues, or is it just being overtaken by this other more urgent?
I think what we have experienced in COVID-19 and what we are experiencing in terms of environmental degradation and climate crisis, there are so many instances and evidence that as of now we can firmly say that these all are impacts of climate crisis, because we are facing droughts, heat waves, cyclones, and everything all together rapidly and very frequently. And I think that advocacy has been done for the young people, and we firmly see that this is happening because of climate crisis. But it's also really important to see that how we can continue to advocate and make people accept that this is happening because of climate crisis, because we cannot move ahead if there is still continues to be denial. And the second thing which I feel that the COVID-19 pandemic also made us realize that COVID-19 is not separate from climate crisis, because we were facing the impacts of COVID-19. Also, we were facing the impacts of climate crisis, which made us more vulnerable as indigenous people. Like for me, because of COVID-19, we were losing our livelihood as indigenous people. But because of cyclones, we're also losing a forest-based livelihood. So this happened across the globe in many parts of the indigenous people and local communities, which we saw the impacts of climate crisis and COVID-19 went hand in hand together. And the solution cannot come in silos. The solution has to come in an integrated approach, which also makes us a difference to advocate for intersectionality. And that's why we feel that we have been saying that climate justice is also social and economic justice. And we cannot separate it. So as I say, moving ahead, for us young people, we have been advocating that we cannot no longer see, like for example, COVID-19 or other employment crisis and climate crisis as a separate entity. It's really important to see that how we are having livelihood security, food security, employment security for young people, and also working towards climate action, whereby it is important that we have finances being allocated for young people's participation in the decision-making processes, where we have green jobs for the young people, that they are being able to be employed. And that's where which also brings down to the fact that we young people should not be seen only as mere young people. We are professional, we have expertise in different thematics, and we need to make sure that we are also giving the opportunities for young people in taking up the job opportunities, which I'm very proud to be part of Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change, because I feel that has given us a safe space to be very honest, to be to the par. And I feel we need more leadership like Secretary General across the policy making spaces, where we have young people being in the policy making spaces and speaking truth to the par, and we can work together on it. So at the end, I feel intersectional approach is the way ahead.
That's right.
I think that, you mentioned the COVID-19 pandemic, and really it has shown us two things. It's shown us, number one, that governments have the resources and the financial ability to address problems. Governments have spent tens of trillions of dollars addressing the pandemic and its economic consequences. Where's the trillions of dollars for the climate crisis? We're seeing nowhere near the mobilization of funds to address that other greater existential threat. And the other thing about the COVID pandemic is the vaccine apartheid. The fact that in the global north, the vast majority of people have access to vaccines, and in the global south, the vast majority do not. And I really think that same type of injustice is happening in the environmental field, it's happening in the biodiversity field, it's happening in the climate crisis. And so really, when we think about this, I agree 100%, Achana, about the importance of integrated, transformative responses, which is what the Sustainable Development Goals really epitomize, a vision of 17 interconnected goals that we need to move forward on. And unfortunately, the Russian war on Ukraine, the COVID-19 pandemic, has deflected our attention from those fundamental goals. I mean, it's a beautiful vision of a just and sustainable society that we should all be prioritizing, and that will have enormous benefits across the entire planet.
I mean, that's an interesting, but also a little bit of a scary reflection, right, from your end. I think since we are in Stockholm now, and so Stockholm +50 begins formally, I think, the day after tomorrow. So what are your hopes for Stockholm +50? What do you hope will be achieved here?
I'm hopeful about Stockholm +50 because I feel it is an opportunity for us to come together and after COP26 ahead of COP27. So I think it's a huge movement for all of us to commit towards more stronger climate policies, environmental restoration policies, and also I think it's a moment to reflect how long we have come, how far we have come. It's almost been 50 years, and I think there are miles to go ahead. So I'm hopeful about it, and what I would like to see in Stockholm +50 is one, an advocacy and commitment to recognize the rights of indigenous people, local communities over the land, forest, and territories, to ensure that there is meaningful leadership and meaningful leadership and participation of young people and local communities and indigenous people in the policy making spaces, ensuring that it is safe and enabling. At the same time, the third, which I would also like to see, that it's really, really important to see that the loss and damage caused to the indigenous people, local communities, and marginalized communities is taken seriously and prioritized, because the loss and damage caused due to environmental degradation and climate crisis cannot be compensated. And it's really, really important to start acknowledging these injustices and working towards it. And I would like to sum up by saying that often I see indigenous peoples, local communities, young people's resilience has been, commended or has been appreciated. I would strongly like to urge that instead of appreciating our resilience, be with us, support us in a fight to make changes in the structures, because only and only when there is change in the structure we can come out of this vicious circle of vulnerability.
Will you be back for Stockholm Plus 100? I assume. Let's see. What about you, David? What are your hopes for Stockholm Plus 50? What are your
Well, you know, 50 years ago at the original Stockholm conference, the seed of the right to a healthy environment was planted. That tree has grown over the past 50 years, and it's now time for us to harvest the fruit. And I think that it's only by taking a rights-based approach to climate action, a rights-based approach to the biodiversity crisis, a rights-based approach to pollution, that we can actually engage inclusive participation of all the affected people, that we can prioritize the people who are being left furthest behind, who are suffering the most badly, and come up with effective, efficient, and equitable solutions to these problems. We know what the answers are. It's simply a matter of taking the actions to do it.
Thank you very much. I mean, this was very insightful from both of you, and I hope I run into you during Stockholm Plus 50 during other events. So thanks for your time. Dr. David Boyd, UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and the Environment, and Archana Sareng, member of the Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group on Climate and Climate Warrior. That's what I would call you. So now we're going to hear from Ms. Ulrike Moder. She's the UN Assistant Secretary General and Director of the Bureau of External Relations and Advocacy in a video message.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the Stockholm Plus 50 Climate Hub, UNDP Hour. My name is Ulrike Moder, and I'm the Assistant Secretary General of UNDP United Nations Development Programme. And we are the largest UN agency with presence in 170 member states and territories. For us, the work ahead of the Stockholm Plus 50 conference began already in January with the very first country consultation in Colombia, where we gathered different actors to voice their concerns, but also solutions to make sure that they could voice really what they think is needed. And for the past 5 months, we have organized over 50 government-led country consultations, gathering voices across generations, from private sector to civil society, from researchers to marginalized groups at the front lines of climate effects and adaptation efforts. We need these voices as an international community. We need them ahead of Stockholm Plus 50, but we also need them beyond, and we need their action. Because who could actually better advise on drought adaptation than pastoralists from sub-Saharan Africa? Or for that matter, for nature-based solutions than the indigenous groups that comprise less than 5% of the world's population, but that are protecting 80% of our global biodiversity. At this crucial window of time, every voice matters and every action counts. We have an intergenerational responsibility to really protect the earth and to ensure that life support systems are available to all. This notion of responsibility was central to the 1972 UN Conference on the Human Environment 50 years back. And so, for me, Stockholm Plus 50 is about reflecting, it's about connecting issues and really accelerate urgent action, the action that is needed. Today's conference is a pivotal but brief moment where we can pause, we can gather information, we can recommit to a path of sustainable and equitable future for all, and we can really make change happen as we take these lessons onwards. Thank you, and again, a very warm welcome to the UNDP Hour.
So, ahead of Stockholm Plus 50, UNDP organized country consultations in over 50 countries where representatives from all over society came together to discuss their concerns, expectations, and suggestions for Stockholm Plus 50 conference. So I have two new guests here. So we have Minister Gustavo Manrique and Matilde Mort. Bienvenido. So let me start with you. So you're the Minister of Environment, Water, and Ecological Transition. So tell me, what do you mean with this last part of your title, ecological transition? What does it mean?
Well, first, thanks for the invitation. For me, it's an honor to share this scenario with you and with Matilde from UNPD, from Ecuador. Ecological transition, I think it's a way of living that all the citizens, the countries, should apply. What is transition? Transition is moving from point A to point B. It is breaking the core status. So we're a new government. We started last year, and at day 9, we signed a decree, a national decree, in order to send the message that Ecuador start a really serious movement to change that inertia. So the pillars are sustainability, circular economy, zero net carbon emission, and water. So we are the 4th country that apply this public policy of ecological transition. So it's a matter of start moving, start switching, start a process of decarbonization, a serious process about that. So we have accomplished some really nice goals in this 12 months of administration.
Okay. So Matilde Mort, so you're UNDP's resident representative in Ecuador. So, and you hosted the country consultations that then led up to Stockholm Plus 50. Can you describe what came out of this consultation process?
Of course, and well, again, thank you for the invitation. Maybe before answering the question, I wanted to talk a little about the context. So Ecuador is a mega diverse country. It has 4 very distinct different regions, the Andean highlands, the Amazon, the Pacific coast, and Galapagos. And this makes it a fantastic scenery and landscape and ecosystem and biodiverse country. No? And it also has a great human diversity. It's an area of a little bit less than half of Sweden, but it still contains 13 different indigenous populations and nationalities. And for many of these people in Ecuador, the environment is not only the source of resources and livelihoods, but it's also a heritage from the ancestors, it's part of their spirituality, and it's part of the vision and of the world and humanity as one. And there is a specific people, the Sarayaku people, who live in the Amazon region, and they speak to us about the Causaxacha, which means the living jungle. And so this is a jungle that is a living being in which all mineral world, the animal world, the vegetable world, the cosmic world lives. And why am I saying this? Because we made these consultations in a context of a people that is very much connected to Pachamama, as it's known, Mother Earth, no? So in terms of the consultation itself, I mean, we knew from the beginning that it had to be inclusive and participatory. So we made a specific outreach to different groups, indigenous groups, Afro-descendant groups, women, youth, LGBTQ community, people with disabilities, and so on. And we had a very large, of course, digital consultation. But also knowing the digital gap, we complemented that with different workshops and interviews and so on. And we also gave the methodology to different groups. So the Confederation of Amazonian indigenous peoples, they replicated the consultations on their own. So it was really a very rich process. So what did we get from this? We had 2,500 persons involved and I would say also collaborating in a global conversation, because as UNDP, we provided a digital space for having not only the consultations at a national level, but also globally, no? And a couple of results from the consultations that I find interesting, and I'm sure we'll talk more about this with the minister. It's issues like the need for strengthening governance systems and for better articulation between different actors is one of the issues that came up. There was a lot of mention also to greater financing, and I think David Boyd mentioned this in the previous section, and also technology transfer, and in general capacity building, because there is a feeling that the technology is out there, but there's not the full access to it, no? There was also a mention to communication, to improve communication and more education and investment in education for sustainable development. Changing economic systems, of course, circular economies, dependence on, reduce the dependence on non-renewable resources and so on. But again, the issue of citizen participation came up. So strengthen citizen participation mechanisms and so on. And perhaps in relation to that, mention also this Andean, in the Andean culture, you have this concept of the minga, la minga. I love that. When I came to Ecuador, I suddenly started hearing about la minga. So la minga is when everybody joins forces to get something done. So communities go out, you know, neighborhoods go out, they clean their streets, they participate. And I think that's a beautiful concept that is also part of this ecological transition, no? All joining forces.
Wow, sounds like a perfect contribution to the Stockholm +50 process, bringing that spirit. So we have a short video, because I mean the country consultations took place in over 50 countries. So I think we're going to get a video introduction to these discussions that were held all over the world.
Still 71% of waste in Vietnam is going to landfill.
So, Minister, I think I have one question for you now, just to kick this off. I think we've heard about the pan-Latin American climate work. So there seems to be some collaborations between Latin American ministers on climate issues. Can you tell us a little bit about that? How is that going, and how's my home country, Chile, doing on those conversations?
Sure. Well, I'm really impressed how is the collaboration moving towards. We have been working together with several ministers around the world, to be honest. We have some closest because of geographic matter, which we are working more tight. But in general terms, we are working really close from some Nordic ministers, for example, Norway, or in Germany as well. And they are really aware, I'm going later on to the region, but talking about Norway or, for example, Germany, they are really aware of protecting our forest and our communities. So, for example, with the UK as well, we just signed a very important agreement, economic and advising collaboration for the south region of Ecuador with a transborder project with Peru, which will protect the landscape. But this is a new term. We're used to hear the landscape, and you think as a view, but it's all which is around the communities and work with bio-entrepreneurs and non-deforest service and products. So with UK, we have been working with Lord Zach Goldsmith very close in different projects, as well with UK, with Galapagos Island. Then with Germany, and actually through a project with the PNUD, UNPD, with Matilde, we have Pro Amazonia, which we are working really close. For example, we export recently, I think it was 250 quintales, I don't know how to translate that unit, to France, and of coffee. And it's coffee produced by local communities. And what it's the world valuing now, it's that coffee, it is produced by local community, but by no deforesting. So it has a seal of non-deforesting. And in the region, we have been close, working really close with what we call the marine corridor, which is, you know, that when I was young, they taught us that Ecuador were neighbors with Colombia and Peru and the Pacific Ocean. But we have a border, a marine border with Costa Rica. Our international waters connect with the international waters of Costa Rica. And for those who know Galapagos, Galapagos is a consequence of volcanic explosions millions of years ago. And what we see, it's when it's over the water. And that's the biodiversity that Matilde was saying, that, that's the place where Charles Darwin inspired the evolution theory. So that's what you see. But it happened to be that underwater, you have these submarine mountains that connect underwater with Costa Rica. And Costa Rica connect with Panama up north and to Colombia. And these species that are not fishing target species, such as whales, manta rays, turtles, and some others, choose these submarine mountains to have a swimway, just as a highway, because of the riches of the food. So we decide, these 4 countries together, the ministers obviously coming from the president, the decision to create the biggest transborder marine corridor. And we signed that in Glasgow, and we as Ecuador increased 6 million hectares of protected area. And as well did it Colombia, Panama, and Costa Rica. So we create this transborder. So there are plenty ways that I can share you of different supporting that we are. You know, the borders were created by humans.
Yeah.
The species doesn't know about borders. So we must work together in a unique strategy to manage our planet as a whole system. You know, there is I love this, and I finish with this. We have to drop the S of the oceans. That's another thing that they taught us when we were young. Oceans. 83% of the waste we collect in Galapagos, 83% come from another continent. So we have local problems that the only way to solve them is with global solutions.
Can I connect back to our previous on the previous panel, just to you, Minister? I mean, so the ambition is to push an ecological transition, right? And do that.
What?
The ecological transition.
Sure.
You mentioned that, and in a collaborative spirit. At the same time, I mean, that in itself is challenging, right? I mean, that's not easy. At the same time, in the last years, you have the pandemic, you have the repercussions of the war on Ukraine. How has that affected your work and the conversations you have with other ministers in Latin America?
Sure. I'm a pathological optimistic guy. I really see always the positive things about things. And I truly believe that we're moving forward. We're here. I just came from Davos last week, the Economic World Forum, and I think that the transversal issue, the conversation was sustainability. So I read the other day as well that after the pandemic, I don't remember the source, but the data was that 4,000% it has increased the awareness of sustainability after pandemic. So I think that the people is more able to talk about that, more able to they understood that if we lower a little bit the production or change the way, just as the pandemic obliged us, will be better. So I've been in this for 25 years, and I truly believe or feel that we are in a better environment to bring this to the table. I think it's a matter of survival, not just as a species, but in the business way, in something, depending on the country you are, but between 5 years or 10 years, if you don't have a purpose, your company will die. No one will choose it. It doesn't matter if you're in South America or in a very developed Nordic country. So it's a matter of survival, not just from the point of view of as a planet, whole living system, but as a business-wise, it's a customer decision.
And I mean, building on that, I have a question for you, Matilda, because I think one of the messages for Stockholm Plus 50, and I think also what came out very strongly in the latest report from the IPCC, was the need for structural deep change, transformation. So, I mean, from your point of view and your experience, is that happening? Are we seeing these deeper changes? And how do you make sure that we're just not nudging around the corners or adapting a little bit, but actually really creating deeper system changes?
Yes, so we have all these transformative agendas on the table, no? The Agenda 2030 and the 17 SDGs, the Paris Agreement, the Sendai for disaster risk reduction, to name just a few of all these agendas that have come forward during the last years. And so how are we actually, how do we actually sustain or promote this transformative effect that these agendas are proposing? Now, and I think I would like to mention there the UNDP Human Development Report of 2020, which is called the Human Development in the Anthropocene, which has, I think, quite a few insights in how we can actually make these changes. One is the concept of agency, personal agency, and I think also the business sector agency in terms of how we actually can change things. Agency is important, for instance, for changing social norms. And we might say, well, cultural changes, social norms take time to change, but not necessarily. For instance, the issue of smoking. Perhaps 30, 40 years ago, it was fanciful to smoke. And today, we all know the repercussions on health and so on. And there's a systemic change in the world in terms of smoking. And I think that's happening, as you were saying, Gustavo, around sustainability and environmental sustainability. So that's one of the ways of change, social norms. The other ones is the incentives to change. Government regulations, fiscal incentives, and so on and so forth. And I think that is happening more and more. For instance, in Ecuador, we are doing a review of the fiscal system to see what kind of subsidies there are that are harmful for the environment. And then we're working together, of course, with the Minister of Environment and Water and Ecological Transition towards changing these systems. And finally, one of the other things that this report mentioned is the nature-based solutions. which is working with local communities, indigenous communities, with using nature in many different ways in the economic sectors. And perhaps a couple of examples from what we're doing in Ecuador with UNDP. We're promoting green infrastructure plans as disaster risk reduction instruments in cities. You mentioned the example of Pro Amazonia with the deforestation-free commodities, deforestation-free coffee, deforestation-free cocoa, working also in the livestock sector and so on. So, I mean, these are only a couple of examples, but I do think there are many, many more. And part of this is, of course, also the availability of finance. You mentioned... well, you've been working with the Galapagos and also finding the financing for sustaining this new agreement between the 4 countries. But if you see globally, financing for environmental sustainability or green finance has grown exponentially, and there's a huge potential there for also changing systems.
That's an interesting observation. I'm thinking another challenging part of this, and I'm going to put you on the spot here, Minister, because I think this is a difficult question for anyone in government. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. And that is how to avoid lock-in during a crisis. So, for example, after the pandemic and during the pandemic, there was this notion and idea that we could build back better, right? So invest in ways that would promote sustainability rather than just continue to lock us into an old fossil fuel infrastructure, for example. What's your take on this as part of a government? Do you believe that you managed to avoid that type of locking that we've seen in other countries in terms of just continue to strengthen existing structures, or did you manage to actually divert some of that recovery into something more sustainable? I know it's a difficult question, but I think everyone is struggling with that.
It's a really great question. It's tough to say. Again, I think there's no only one answer for that. It will depend in the country you were born. In Ecuador, we have unfulfilled basic needs. For you to let you know, I have a policy not to talk bad about my country when I'm out of the country, but to make the point of this extraordinary question, we have the highest rate in child malnutrition in the region, 1 every 3 kids. So we don't have water, fresh water, and I'm going later on to that point. In some regions of the country, we don't have sanitation in some regions. We need to create some economic system in order for other countries to help us, you know. We were one of the 4th city, Guayaquil, that was more hit in the world globally for COVID. Guayaquil was the 4th city with more deaths by hour. So it is hard to say that you have to lock or unlock. I think it will depend the industry, the product, the richness of the country, the GDP, and so I don't know. It's hard to have a concrete answer.
Yeah. Do you have anything on that, Matilda?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. You have all these vulnerabilities, and I think it's hard to see beyond the vulnerabilities when you are in such a crisis context. And I mean, we lived through it with the pandemic, and I think we're going to live through it again very soon with the pressure on agricultural systems due to the war in Ukraine. But I think that in the midst of these uncertainties and social needs, I think there are quite a lot of opportunities. And I was mentioning the finance, the growth in green finance. Of course, there are differences. If you see Europe, for instance, had huge packages that also incentivated green transformations, social financial packages, but with a condition, no? And I think we have not seen that in the Latin American region. It's like way behind. I think perhaps I think the figure is 2% of what was invested for the pandemic recovery had a green dimension to it. Yeah. But despite that, and on the finance sector, for instance, in Ecuador, we're working with the cooperative sector. The cooperative sector is 1/3 of the financial sector in Ecuador. And we just supported them to do the environmental and social risk analysis system. And that is the basis for green credits. And now there's a huge amount of green credits coming in through the cooperative sector, and where we then can work with transforming agricultural systems, going towards electromobility and so on and so forth. And this is also happening on the private side. There's a lot of financing coming to the private banks to accompany the private sector to do this transformation. So yes, there is a huge social need, but at the same time, there are many things happening that are leading towards this change also.
That's very interesting.
Just a short comment on that we are, as Matilda said in the first intervention, the most megadiverse country in the world per species per square kilometer. We have in 1 hectare of the Amazon more species than together Canada and United States together in 1 hectare. So we are really giving an ecosystemic service to the world. The thing is that we haven't negotiated before that with the country. I really, as a citizen, Ecuadorian citizen, I really feel as a rich country in terms that we have preserved that megadiverse. And the other, I really see the biodiverse of our country as a currency. The currency that the world needs in order to survive by preserving it. The thing is, we have to know how to value a jaguar, a tiger, a monkey, a plant. And we have to step in and negotiate with rich countries. And they have to pay. We only contribute 0.18% of the gas emissions worldwide. But we are #1 in megadiversity. There's not a balance there, And the second thing that the world needs for this ecological transition is the minerals, minerals. You need the silicio for solar panels. You need the aluminium for the frame. You need a lot of things. And we're really rich on that as well. So I think that the challenge, and the thing is, one is on the top and the other one is underground. So how to manage that by giving the communities that in the past, they haven't been attended, you say? They haven't been, with no water, no electricity. So we have to combine those 3 things because Ecuador needs resources to fulfill the chronic child malnutrition.
We need to wrap up there. I'm sorry, Matilda. I know we could have gone on for many hours. I want to thank you so much for taking the time in your very busy calendars to join us here. Thank you very much, Matilda Mort, and Minister Gustavo Manrique for joining us. And for the audience, thank you very much for joining the UNDP Hour. The session tomorrow will take stock of the footprint of Stockholm+50. What did the 1972 conference mean, and what can we expect 50 years later? And our guests will be the Swedish Minister for International Development Cooperation, Matilda Ernkrans, and UNDP's Administrator, Achim Steiner, and Ambassador Jan Mårtensson, who played a key role during the conference in 1972. And here to moderate that session is the chair of Stockholm Environment Institute and former Climate Minister of Sweden, Miss Isabella Lövin. Thank you very much and see you all tomorrow.